I literally can't do anything. This is what I'm going to do. I'll do what I've got, and I'll see how that works. And it worked. He lost. He didn't have many mounted knights. He saw that there were 10,000 French mounted knights. There's no way you're going to go into battle against them, as as typical medieval warfare would be. You can't do that.
Right.
So you had to go with what you've got. I've got so many archers. Well, I've got them. I might as well use them. Right. Okay. Let's use the archers and see what happens. We've got this nice bit of narrow ground. Let's use that. And it turns out it was the perfect combination. I mean, they would call it the perfect storm of tactics. And it just worked. And because it was, in the French words, anti chivalry, it was anti the tactics of the day. It was anti what was expected of a king. A king should be noble and lead his men into battle, not hide behind the row of stakes and let the archers do the work. And again, it came down to class as well, because the bowmen were more likely to be working class peasants. And here, these working class peasants managed to decimate the French nobility. And that kind of class war was not taken very well. And I think you can call Henry a military genius, and there is an argument for that as well, because he's inspired, he picked the right tactics. But I think, I mean, I'm a big soccer fan,
No, you can say
and
football. I know what you mean.
sorry, just and you get the tactics. You go, well, I haven't got that, so I'll do this. I'll do this formation. I'll try this play, and you just work with what you've got. And I think that's what happened. And if that's genius, then you can call it genius, and if it's just desperation, you can call it that as well. But it turned out to be a kind of moot point in the end, because he died before the French king, so it was never kind of it never
Realized.
came to pass. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's ironic is that 40 years later, the English will cry foul because Jean Bureau, the slowly guy was elevated by Charles VII to become his master of artillery, and it would be
Mm.
the artillery that would end up decimating the English knights. I think it was at either Formigny or Castillon. I can't remember,
I can't
but
remember off
it
the top of my head now.
but but you could sort of see the reversal and an irony, because whereas in 1415 the French were crying foul over the English longbowmen, now the
Mm.
English knights are crying foul over the French using field artillery to kind of win these battles.
I mean,
So
it would be replayed again in 1815 in the Battle of Waterloo.
that's
I
true.
mean,
Yes.
Wellington famously described his own infantrymen as scum. He didn't trust them, and he gave them the most simple instructions because he thought that they were too stupid to follow complicated ones. And you got these French cavalrymen, and throughout history, the horse has been kind of interlinked with the higher classes, if that makes sense. Because if you have a
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
horse, you,
Yeah.
you know you're of a higher, quote unquote, higher class. And here you've got these squares of scum, to use the phrase, absolutely destroying the French cavalry. And yes, it was a tactical blunder on the fault of Napoleon's marshals, but that's not the point. It was the fact that the common man had beaten the better, if that makes sense. The scumbag has beaten the ruler, and I think throughout history we see these things. We have the peasants' revolt. We have the Agincourt. We have Waterloo. We have the Peterloo massacre, which flips the other way, where the army destroyed the everyman,
Mhm.
and we do see this class war, and that kind of comes into the Tudor politics, because at the time you've still got people who in Elizabethan England who still remember what it was like before, and I think Tudor politics can be split into two distinct phases: pre-Elizabethan and then kind of Elizabethan. You've got the whole. I mean, you can't go into it now because literally it's a can open worms everywhere. If you talk about Henry VIII, because it was his belief in the divine right of kings, and that led to the kind of dissolution of the monasteries and the break from Rome, and then his son being so passionately hooked into that way of thinking too, and there are people who talk about Bloody Mary, his sister, being the real bloodthirsty queen, and yet if
Mhm.
you look at the historical records, Edward VI was worse. The way he put down revolts, there was one in Norfolk where he decimated. He was really ruthless, brutal, and yet the
But it pales
prefix
in comparison
bloody got
to the
put
way
into
that his.
hers.
But I was gonna say, but it pales in comparison to the way that Henry VIII, especially in his later years, kind of
Oh yeah,
put down these
absolutely.
rebellions. Actually, I actually do want to talk a little bit
Ooh,
about pre-Elizabethan Tudor politics because
yes,
because we did mention the Wars of the Roses earlier, right?
yes,
And obviously we get Henry VII, who unites both the houses of York and Lancaster to create the Tudor
yes,
dynasty, and then things go well for a little while. He dies, he's the miser king, and everybody's happy that Henry VIII. Although, to be fair, Henry was never meant to be king; it was supposed to be his brother
no,
Arthur. Um,
yes,
but you mentioned this a minute ago, um but the whole break with with Rome, as convention tells us, is because
mm.
Henry was very desperate to have a son, because he'd been married to Catherine of Aragon for, I think, what, 30 years ish, give or take.
Yeah. He's been a long time.
And they only had one child, who would end up becoming, Mary, or Bloody
Mm,
Mary. And
mm,
in modern sensibilities, you would think, well, I mean, it's a no-brainer. Mary would be queen, right? But keep in mind, I mean, we're talking about a period that's not too divorced from the Wars of the Roses, and because Henry is very much aware of just how tenuous his family's hold on power is.
yes,
So, and especially especially in the North, I mean, you have people who are kind of saber rattling, or just looking for any excuse to kind of throw off the yoke and kind of go back to the way
yes,
that things were. I mean,
yes,
and we can look back to the Perkin Warbeck incident, where Henry VII, violently, made quite sure that everybody knew, yes, there is a king of England, and it's me. It's not this imposter here, who claims to
no. I
be
mean,
Richard.
we had Lambert Simnel as well. I mean, he just got let off by being put in the kitchens to work. But
That's right. That's right.
Perkin Warbeck was really kind of um, yes, a bit of a show of power. Who's king? I'm king, and
Right.
it was really kind of a show of strength. I mean, if you think about Henry VII, I think there was uh, he had a very interesting life. He spent most of it in France,
Yeah,
just
he was in exile. Yeah, yeah.
out of the way. And his, I think his grandfather married Henry V's widow, Queen Catherine.
Yeah, Owen Tudor, wasn't it?
Yes, that was Queen Catherine, the one from Henry V.
Yeah,
He
exactly. Yeah.
married, and then so that was the kind of the dynastic link then. Um,
And
but Henry
wasn't his mother Margaret Beaufort? Wasn't she a
Margaret
descendant of
Beaufort,
John of?
yes.
Wasn't she distantly related to John of Gaunt?
John, yeah, John of Gaunt, yes.
Okay.
It's very interlinked. A lot of these kind of royal families,
Yeah,
the
exactly.
gene pool is more of a puddle, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's very close.
Not Habsburg,
Not
muddied,
certainly
but
not. You haven't got the Habsburg chin going on, but you've got a lot of very close connections, and you do see it when you look at the names of the families coming up. You seem to get the same ones: Devereux, Seymour, Boleyn, Carey, Beaufort. You get the same names coming through, and
and the
that's
Howard
because
clan too. So
the Howard clan, yeah, absolutely. The Dudleys, all these people, all these families that have that influence over him. And, Henry had a really interesting life. And he was, again, not raised thinking he was going to be king. There was no expectations on him going to be. But as kind of a Lancastrian, he would have seen from afar what had been happening. Being in the French court or being around the French court, he would have heard the stories of what was been happening, heard about the Henry VI, and heard about how Edward IV was that kind of battle. And then, of course, Edward IV was exiled to France as well. They fled after Henry VI was reinstated. So it was a back and forth all the time. So I can see that Henry would have grown up thinking, actually, we need stability here. We need kind of, we can't have this back and forth all the time. We need that kind of that one stability, and going through fighting Richard III. And there was a big kind of hoo-ha in this country a while ago. You probably read about you seem to be very medievalist kind of expertise when they found Richard III and in a car park, and
I remember. Yes, I remember reading about that. Yeah,
it was amazing. And just there was
where
there
was
was
it? Was it Leicester?
it was
Where they found
Leicester,
it?
yeah. They
Okay.
found it, and there's the historian angle, and then there's the kind of the romantic ideal, and there's the Richard of York society. And I'm a proud Yorkist girl. I come from that area. I wear my white rose with pride, and you know, I don't care who knows it, but
Just don't
at
go
the
to
time,
Lancaster. That's all.
well, yeah, not too loud. Keep it quiet. But there was the Richard of York Society have always protested that he's been vilified, and again, it comes down to Tudor politics, because when Henry V, a lot of the information that we know about Richard III comes from Shakespeare's play, and he was writing for at the time he was writing for the Lord Chamberlain. Lord Chamberlain George Carey, Henry Carey. I can't remember which one's which. I think it's definitely a Carey, Lord Chamberlain,
Okay.
who's the son of Mary Boleyn, who was the sister of Anne Boleyn, who was the mother of Elizabeth I.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're thinking, right, I'd like you to write a play, please, William. Excellent. I'm going to write a play about Richard III. What, you mean the guy that almost killed the Queen's grandfather? Yes, and I'm going to make him I'm going to make him a proper villain. Oh, and is the Queen's grandfather going to make an appearance in the play? Yes, and he's going to be great.
Yeah. He's just gonna make him a complete twat, you know? Because
Yeah,
why not?
why not? And a lot of our kind of it's that Mandela effect, isn't it? A lot of that kind of our visions of Richard III come from that Shakespearean thing, this crooked back. You know, you got Anthony Shear on crutches playing this kind of almost tarantula-like figure of Richard III. You
Or
know, I'm a
Benedict
villain.
Cumberbatch too.
It's haunting versions. And so there was this massive kind of media storm about the finding of Richard III. And this this woman, I mean, personally, I don't particularly like her. I'm sure she's a lovely person, but the way she came across, I didn't like her. She found it, and then she said, "Oh, well, I found it because the grave spoke to me." I said, "Oh, please!" And
Okay.
There was an R on the tarmac, and I just knew that's where he was. Like, oh my gosh, no, okay, fine,
She
right,
sounds like a
okay.
psychic.
Uh, well, psychic is a close word, but um, so when they uncovered this person, they dug it up and they went, "Oh, we found this grave. Oh, brilliant! It looks like he's been in a battle. Oh, fantastic! Oh, he's got a crooked spine. What?" So for years they've been saying, "Oh no, it was just a Shakespearean kind of twist. He's put this crook back because you know the Victorians' view. If you had a crook back, you were kind of crooked yourself. Oh, he's got a crooked spine. You're joking." And the face of this woman dropped, because for years they'd be saying, "No, he didn't have a hunchback. He didn't have a, you know, he was perfectly normal. It's just Shakespeare." And it turns out he did have a crooked spine. What? This is news. And they rebuilt his face, and there was this very toe curling scene. And if you can find it, I highly recommend you watch it. But it's one of those uncomfortable watches. Do you know when you're almost hiding behind a cushion going, "Oh no, I can't watch it." Where she comes face to face with the real face of Richard III. And she walks into the room and go, "Oh, he's beautiful." When I look into his eyes, I don't see the eyes of a killer. And I had to stop it then because I thought, hang on, no, no, no. You do not become a medieval monarch without having to kill some people. You do not survive so many battles because he was his brother's right-hand man for so many years. If you think the Battle of Barnet, Richard III led the successful right flank. All these battles that he was involved in, he wasn't a soft, stay-at-home guy. He was a fighter. He was a warrior. He,
Right, right,
he
and what's even fascinating is the fact that this was the norm. I mean, really, Henry VI was if anything, he was the abnormal
he
monarch.
was because he wasn't that warrior.
Right.
He was more of the kind of the use your advisors kind of you do the fighting, I'll do this.
Yeah, because he was raised by or he was mainly raised by clerics, wasn't he? Or
Yes,
influenced
yeah,
by clerics, I should say.
yes, that's it. And then you get Edward IV, who is a proper Yorkshire lad, proper hard, really into fighting, and he was a very big warrior. And the whole York family, Edward, Richard, and even to a lesser extent George, they were fighters. They were raised to be fighters. And there's historical documents that kind of people have studied, and they kind of hypothesize that if Richard had met Henry 1-to-1, there would have been only one outcome, and that was a Yorkist victory. There's no way that Henry Tudor, with his lack of battle experience, could have beat Richard III in combat.
Yeah, which makes Bosworth Field all the more astonishing, given the fact
Yes,
that Richard did have the advantage in terms of experience, and most of his troops were battle hardened veterans, whereas Henry for the most part he most of his troops were mercenaries, weren't they?
yes, yeah, French mercenaries. He had some Welsh bowmen there. Richard had the cannons, and if you're a kind of poor mercenary or just come, or you're a local farmhand who've got a bill hook and you've come along for the ride, if you've never seen a cannon before, and here's the king. The king at the time was this mythical presence. If you're a poor farmhand who's going to go, yeah, I believe in Henry Tudor's cause, I'm going to go and fight, and you see the king of England at the time, that divine right of kings. So essentially, for the everyman, the king was God's presence on earth, and he would have been in his fine armor, and he would have had a crown on his helmet, and all these cannons. It would have been literally awesome. Not the word that we use now, oh, that's awesome, but awesome sight.
Right, right.
Oh my God, that is literally God on earth. This is the King of England. And so that presence would have kind of really offset a lot of Henry's confidence, I think. There was a story about the Battle of Mortimer's Cross, one of the early Yorkist Lancastrian scuffles. And at the time, there was a phenomenon where there was ice crystals in the air, and it caused a solar flare, which looked like a crucifix,
Hmm.
like a double crucifix. And I think it was Edward of York's father, Richard of York, who used it to his advantage and said, "Oh, this is God obviously blessing us on the battlefield." So that religion was really a kind of very important thing. And again, it comes back to the kind of what was inspiring Shakespeare to write his plays. There was still a lot of religious elements in there, because in Richard III, you've got this king. Yes, he's portrayed as being this villainous kind of spidery character who puts his brother into a vat of wine, and who kind of tricks his way. And I'm not going to go into it, but I'll just mention it. The Prince is in the Tower. There's a whole big debate about that to be explored at another time. Um,
I mean, Richard III is basically the Renaissance version of House of Cards, if you think about it.
yes, yes, he is. He's that kind of one who plays it all, doesn't he? Because
Yeah,
as
I mean,
soon as his
it's Frank Urquhart with the crown,
yeah,
essentially.
because as soon as his brother dies, he's there. He puts the sons into the Tower of London for their own protection. He seizes that. He finds that his brother had declared him on his deathbed that no one else was around, that he would be Lord Protector, and you can't do that on a whim. You can't. He's got to have been thinking about it. And he suddenly takes that power, he suddenly takes that throne. So in Shakespeare's world, the everyman that would have went to see his play would have went, that's awful grammar, who would have gone to see his plays would have been aware of the divine right of kings. So Shakespeare dares to show a king of England, the anointed one, being taken over by this Lancastrian usurper.
Well, what's fascinating too is the fact that Shakespeare doesn't pull any punches. He shows the political
No.
maneuvering, and
Yes.
and 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 I was watching Ken Burns' documentary on the Vietnam War. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's a very good watch. And there was this one episode where they were talking about the campaign of '68, where the Democratic Party was in disarray, right? And then and then you had Nixon on the other side, and and as you're watching the episode, you learned that Nixon had to do a lot of underhanded backroom deals because the North Vietnamese were very close to signing making peace with South Vietnam, right?
Yeah.
And Johnson had everything aligned and ready to go. Nixon goes in, does a little backdoor deal, and torpedoes the whole peace process because he basically convinces President Tu of South Vietnam to back out of the peace the peace deal because he assures him that he's going to be able to get him a much better settlement when he's president. And what's even more fascinating is that Johnson was very much aware of what happened because they tapped the South Vietnamese embassy, so they were in on they knew exactly what happened, but Johnson couldn't say anything. So Nixon got into the White House because Johnson had to keep his mouth shut because if he exposed Nixon, he would have to expose the fact that the CIA bugged the South Vietnamese, and that would lead to even more
revealing your hand.
Exactly. So we see this power play, happening even in modern politics, because and coincidentally enough, it was Richard who did all of this.
Yes. I mean, if you looked back and if it was a plot, if it was like a John le Carré novel, you go, oh, brilliant, well done.
That could never happen in real life, but then
that couldn't happen in real life. But well done,
right? But then you see something. But then you see what Richard Nixon did, and you're like, I don't know if I should be mad at this guy or like applaud him because he got what he wanted. But but in the process, he extended the Vietnam War for another 5 years, costing many more lives.
Yeah,
exactly. And you could even say Richard Nixon is like a modern version of Richard III because this is a man who he cheats and lies and steals his way to the top, and he uses terror tactics kind of like what Richard III did,
and also started as vice president, the right hand man.
Exactly. And let's also keep in mind because and correct me if I'm wrong, didn't Richard III have like a cadre of men he sort of like leaned on to do his dirty work for him?
He was always seen to have his hands clean.
Right. Whereas Nixon, he had the plumbers to do the things for him while he could sit back and say, I'm as clean as a whistle.
That's why just there's this historical evidence that says that Richard of York Richard III, as he was then, was nowhere near the Tower of London when the princes were said to have been killed.
I'm not a crook. That's what he would have said.
Or I'm not a crookbat. Even better.
I mean, the parallels are just remarkable because one is metaphorically crooked and the other one was literally crooked.
Exactly, and just you can see it all the time through Shakespeare. And I don't think Shakespeare was being, deliberately, intelligently political. I think he was at the base of what Shakespeare was doing was he was an entertainer. He wrote to entertain, and politics makes good stories.
Yeah, and absolutely.
I mean, if you look at some of the tragedies of Shakespeare's, out of 10, 40% of them are set in Rome.